From WAMU 88.5 at American University in Washington, welcome to the Politics Hour starring Tom Sherwood. I'm Kojo Nandi. Tom Sherwood is our resident analyst. He's a reporter for NBC4 and a columnist for the current newspapers. Tom Sherwood, welcome.
Good afternoon.
Also joining us in studio is Ebbin. He is a member of the Virginia Senate. He's a Democrat who represents the Commonwealth's 30th District. Senator Ebbin, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me again.
Later in the broadcast, we'll be talking with Phil Mendelson. He is the chairman of the D.C. Council. He'll be joining us in studio later. If you have questions or comments for Senator Ebbin, you can start calling now, 800-433-8850. And speaking of Virginia, we will be in Virginia on Tuesday, July 21st. Kojo, in your community, we'll be discussing the military and the defense industry and how they shape our region. Our guest will be Virginia Senator Tim Kaine. You are more than welcome to join us. Tickets are free. You can go to our website, kojoshow.org. That is Tuesday, July 21st. Doors open at 6:30
Is it in the afternoon? Is it during the daytime?
During the day, well,
no, it's going to serve alcohol.
6:30 in the evening. We never serve alcohol at Kojo in your community because everybody gets excited enough as it is. Speaking of Virginia and where we will be, again, on July 21st, Washington Post reporting today, a federal appeals panel on Thursday unanimously affirmed the public corruption convictions against former Virginia Governor Robert McDonald, writing in a long opinion, 89 pages, that he received a fair trial and was duly convicted by a jury of his fellow Virginians, while his attorneys have vowed to take this case to the Supreme Court, and his wife is pursuing a separate ongoing appeal. It is now likely he will be sent to federal prison.
Yes, and Scott McFarland from Channel 4, NBC4, noted in one of his tweets about this subject, noted that this appeal denied goes against the grain of 44 states attorneys general, 44 state attorneys general filed an appeal on McDonald's behalf. So I think the issue here is public corruption. And it's just extraordinary. And also, I hadn't seen the whole page, 89 pages, I think you said, that the judges wrote that McDonald had attempted to throw Mama under the bus.
Yes.
That by blaming his wife for his predicament rather than taking the responsibility himself. And that he was fair trial, duly convicted, and no cause to undo.
Senator Ebbin, and this all had to do with gifts and ethics in the Commonwealth of Virginia. What's your take on it?
It certainly does. I'm glad it was upheld because there's no question it was corruption. I haven't read the appeals court's opinion either, but $177,000 loans, vacation, Rolex, and other luxury goods is, I don't think anyone can deny that it's wrong. And his wife may have contributed a little bit, but he threw his wife under the bus for his entire career. She didn't sign up for this, and I don't want to guess about the state of their marriage, but when you're the governor, you need to take responsibility for what the actions you take and the things that you receive. And I think the fact that he didn't report these gifts shows that he knew it was wrong or didn't want to be known for them.
The name of the Washington football team came under scrutiny again this week, this time a federal judge ordering the cancellation of the Washington Redskin trademark registrations. It has been opposed by decades for Native American activists. And even though this cancellation has been ordered by the federal judge, it's not over yet. He affirmed an earlier ruling by the Federal Trademark Trial and Appeal Board. And of course, the team says that it is going to appeal this ruling. The earlier vote was that it is ineligible for federal trademark protection under something known as the Lanham Act, which bars protection for names that may disparage or bring people into contempt and dispute. In addition to that, Tom, you have the Interior Secretary, Sally Jewell, saying that that land under RFK Stadium belongs to us, the federal government. We will not be leasing it to any team that has an offensive name.
I know you talked about this week. I think indeed. Jonathan O'Connell from the Post, but I pointed out to several people as I've done some reporting on this, the Obama administration and the current Interior Secretary will have virtually no say, and because there's only 18 months left in the term of the Obama administration. The District of Columbia has a lease of 22 years more on the RFK Stadium site. So whatever happens to the team name, whatever happens to the lease, we are still probably years away from that. But this is, given the Confederate flag controversy, given the Trump controversy, which maybe we'll discuss.
Yep.
I mean, this is the heightened sensitivity of the team name. It could be, and conversely or perversely, an opportunity here for these other events to encourage Snyder to reconsider his, I think 2013, I will never change the name. And now I've told people, based on my reporting, that as strongly as Dan Snyder wants to keep the name, he's not living in a diving bell. He knows what's happening in the country. And it may just be a consideration of how to change the name rather than whether he'll change the name. And I think that's where I am right now, to see what he does.
Senator Ebbin, your Democratic governor really wants this team to come to Virginia, and he says, at this point anyway, the name of the team doesn't matter that much to him.
Well, the governor is all about economic development and bringing economic development and jobs to Virginia. So I know he wants the Washington football team very much to be in Virginia, and I'd like to see them there too, but I'd like a different name.
Well, the governor said he's not going to tell private businesses what to do in terms of their names. Just as with the Confederate flag, if you go down 95, there's this huge Confederate flag, 20 by 30, whatever, it's huge flag. But the governor, when he was up in town a week or so ago, he said, that's on private property. As much as I don't like the flag, as much as I'm taking it off the license tags and all of that, that's private property matter, and I'm not going to. I'd like for them to take it down, but it's nothing we can do as a state to make them.
Speaking of aforementioned flag, your district includes some pieces of Northern Virginia where people still see a fair amount of Confederate references and symbols. Local politicians in Alexandria said this week they'd consider moving away from some traditions like flying the Confederate flag twice a year. What would you like to see happen in Northern Virginia?
I'd like no Confederate flag flown on a public street in Alexandria. The statue that's there, the Appomattox statue, looks kind of sad towards the south at people who died, and it's been there for, I think, more than 100 years. I don't know that I'm a fan of removing the statue from all public view, but Jefferson Davis Highway, I've gotten a lot of comments from constituents. I lived and still live a few blocks from Jefferson Davis Highway for most of my 25 years in Alexandria, and I don't think it's the most welcoming name as we try and lure those from DC to come in and shop and do business in Virginia. Jefferson Davis was not a Virginian, so on that count, I'd like to change the name. The rub is, where do you stop? I've gotten from colleagues in other parts of the state questions about other names. In Richmond, people are talking about trying to divert the Monument Avenue 5K with the statues of all these Confederate generals, not to have it on Monument Avenue. So a question is where you draw the line, but I think as one thing that's clearly over the line is Jefferson Davis Highway is our welcoming gateway to Virginia, for a name for a non-Virginian.
I wrote a newspaper column about this earlier, and I said, well, you could start with taking down the Washington Monument. George Washington was a slaveholder, and while the Mount Vernon folks will tell you that history, they try to say he was more of a benevolent slaveholder, if that's a possibility to exist. But that, in fact, he did. And he challenged slaves that tried to escape or did escape. He did all the things that slaveholders did. So at what point, and I asked McGough this also, he says, at what point do you take down all the monuments on Monument Avenue? I've said the Edmund Pettus Bridge for Selma. I don't want the bridge name to change. I want African Americans, people all
remember that history
to come when they walk over the bridge or pass over to know who that was, what happened there, and why it's important in American history. We cannot whitewash or blackwash everything in town in the country so that we don't know what our history is.
Don your headphones because we have a caller on this issue of Confederate symbols. He has a vaguely familiar name. Some guy named Jim Moran is on the phone. Congressman Moran, thank you for joining. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
You know, Coach, I was just listening to you, and I couldn't help myself from calling. Is
there a time limit on this speech?
You go ahead.
These are all great issues, and I can't. It's tough to show much discipline from speaking out on all of them. But in terms of the Confederate symbols, I do think my good friend Adam has it right. We should stop the tradition of putting up the Confederate flags. It's only a couple of days a year, but I think that time has passed us. But it is interesting with regard to the Confederate statue, and others have called for taking it down. There was a time in the 1980s when a young, headstrong mayor suggested that it be taken down and dumped upside down in the Potomac.
I remember that, Jim Moran.
Yeah, and he had come down from the north and perhaps had a different perspective, but he got thousands of letters, negative letters, of course. The poor staff had to respond to them. I'll never forget one with some a jackbooted person urinating on a tombstone that had Jane Fonda's name on it, and then he had put my face beside it. I still have trouble figuring out the meaning of that, but a lot of it obviously was one of the more pungent ones, but they were very negative. Mostly people who had lived in Alexandria and had moved subsequently further south. But it did make me look into the history of it, and as Adam says, it's a much more nuanced statue. If you look at it, it's a Confederate soldier with his arms crossed, his head down, looking to the south. It's contemplative, and I think it's really a statue of defeat rather than defiance. That kind of statue, I think, is perfectly appropriate, and it does recognize the history of the city. I'm going to weigh in just for a moment, if I could, on the Redskins' name, too.
10 seconds.
My father played for the Boston Redskins under George Preston Marshall, which was he was the most racist owner among a pool of football owners who were not known for their progressivity. They were called the Boston Redskins initially, but up in New England, the term Redskin meant scalp. There are historic posters of the amount of money that was being offered for the number of Redskins. This is at least a pejorative name, if not an incendiary name that really
I'm glad you made that point, Jim Moran, because even though we do have to move on, and thank you for your call, I'm going to move on for 1 second to an individual who actually doubts the history that you just talked about in terms of scalps. Here is Paul in Arlington, Virginia. Paul, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hi. I had called in to correct what Victoria Phillips said on the previous show on this subject. Yes. And I should say I have a great deal of respect for Jim Moran, and I'm from the Boston area also originally. But there's a very interesting article by Ives Goddard, who's at least either currently or formerly of the Smithsonian. I've lost track, and he's one of the nation's foremost authorities on American Indian languages. And he wrote an article in 2005, which is reproduced on the Smithsonian website, that debunks the claim that the term Redskins refers to bloody scalps. And he traces the term in great detail in the late 18th to early 19th centuries, and he points out that it seems as if the term was coined by American Indians themselves.
So you take the work of one historian, against the work of all others in order, essentially, to support your point of view.
Just as we have a living constitution, and I'm from Atlanta. I'm from the South. I'm a proud Georgian and all of that. And I grew up in the South in the 60s. And I'm aware that, I'll just go back to the flag and the Confederates. The Confederate flag was not flown from the Civil War into the modern era. It was a battle flag. It was Robert E. Lee's battle flag. And it wasn't even much of the flag for the Confederacy when it was around for a couple of years. It was only the Confederate flag has been appropriated by people who oppose the federal government and oppose racial integration and
Oppose
all the
school
other things.
desegregation.
And so the flag does not, when I see the Confederate flag, I recognize, I've been to Cyclorama in Atlanta, I've been to Civil War museums and history places, and I understand the fight that was done. And I know the economics of the battle, and that economics were based on slavery. So I'm not trying to separate those two. But the flag, the Confederate flag, has been corrupted. And so therefore it can't be used in public spaces. The team name, whether Redskins means scalp, whether it means whatever else, is a kind of more, there's no commercial, I mean, there's no public government use of the flag, of the Redskins name. And then losing the trademark rights means that anyone can make Redskins material and sell it, that the Redskins don't have a unique right for their own property. So that's a different kind of fight. And I don't know where that's going to go. I do know that the team would like to come back maybe to Washington to be at the RFK site. Changing the name would be one of the requirements before the team could do that. There's no way in this city that the team name won't change in this city. But in Virginia, I don't know. And in Maryland, I think they're losing out on the team anyway, so I don't know what's going to happen.
Thank you very much for your call. The Supreme Court ruled in late June that the Constitution guarantees same-sex couples the right to marry in all states. There are already movements afoot in your state, Senator Ebbin, Virginia, and elsewhere to respond to that ruling. According to the Washington Post, GOP officials in Virginia are considering proposals to, quoting here, protect the religious freedoms of Virginians. What are your expectations for where this debate could be headed?
Well, I can't figure out what they're afraid of. In Virginia, we have no laws that any private party has to. I mean, you could get married at noon. You could be fired at 2 and evicted at 3 because you're gay. And it's pretty clear under the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, which no one is talking about changing, at least no liberals or Democrats, and under the First Amendment, which no one's talking about changing, that no church or synagogue or mosque has to marry anyone that they don't want to. I mean, no one has ever asked the Catholic Church to marry divorced people, or a synagogue to marry interfaith people, or mixed marriage, as they would call it, if that's against the policy of that house of worship. Well, so it's a lot about nothing. It's a lot about using fear to win elections.
I was going to say, some of the opponents in the district, for example, where same-sex couples married wanted to adopt children, and Catholic Charities did not want to deal with same-sex couples because it violated the Catholic people do fear that maybe not now. This is how the opponents say it to me. Maybe not now. You won't come after our churches, and they have a right to not have these services. But once you establish this, you'll come around another year or two later and do the same thing.
That's the next item on your
agenda. It's kind of the slippery slope argument.
To religious institutions?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's
that
just
will end up
outlandish.
taxing churches.
Yeah, no, I don't think there's ever been a move to tax churches, and I'm on the Democratic side, more progressive liberal side. I haven't heard about this secret movement. I think it's just all about elections. That's what it's really about. And people of faith, a lot of them, or gay people of faith, want to be married in their institutions. Does this other side want to stop them?
Speaking of elections, this issue, you mentioned it twice, is supposed to be a red meat issue for conservatives that they can use to motivate their voters in the fall when there are elections for the state house and Senate in November. Those elections are supposed to be low turnout elections. The people who will show up are going to be the people who are most, I guess, excited, agitated, riled up. This is an issue that riles people up.
It does. We don't have that many swing districts, so I think in a lot of cases it's about future elections and protecting people from Tea Party primaries. But we have in the Virginia Senate and the House too some great targets for Democrats to pick up seats, and we're going to see with our 5 statewide Democratic elected officials and Medicaid expansion, people being denied health care that would help the state if we can't motivate our own base on issues that really matter.
What are there races in Northern Virginia? What would be some of the Northern Virginia races where Democrats believe you have a chance to strengthen your Senate majority?
Picking up seats.
Sure. I think in the House races, Republicans who could be vulnerable are Republican Delegate Tad Greason is opposed by Democrat Liz Miller, who lost a narrow race last time. We've got an open seat where Tom Rust is retiring in the House. Jennifer Boysko is running. We have a seat in Manassas that's not a Republican seat, but an open seat that we've got an outstanding candidate in, Prince William and Jeremy McPike. We also have Dick Black, who just keeps saying outrageous, outlandish things, whether he's writing to foreign dictators or talking about handing out plastic fetuses. He's opposed by a young, dynamic woman at the emergency room doctor named Dr. Jill McCabe. So we feel good about our chances there, as well as some seats in other parts of the state.
Our guest is Adam Ebbin. He's a member of the Virginia Senate, a Democrat who represents the Commonwealth's 30th District. You talk about the laws in Virginia as they already exist, protecting the religious liberty of people. But when you consider what do you consider to be the next wave of priorities for LGBT rights in Virginia? Specifically, do you have any plan on crafting proposals in the General Assembly?
We would like to codify legislation that says that no government employee can be discriminated against in terms of employment status. That's something we've been working on, has passed the Senate before. I'd like to see that go to the private sector. We've seen so many Fortune 500 companies in Virginia who don't discriminate, have good policies, and we want to create a more welcoming state. The governor has talked repeatedly about working with forward-thinking businesses from all over the world, and we want Virginia to be known as a state that prioritizes diversity rather than a state that hangs on to vestiges of the Confederacy or looks for ways to be anti-gay in terms of legislation. We've had legislation in recent years to give license to discriminate with adoption agencies and otherwise, and we just don't need that.
Well, in the big picture, given all the social things that are changing, whether it's the flag, whether it's a football team, whether it's LGBT issues, it seems, and income inequality, it seems to me that we're in some kind of new version. I've written a column about this, of the kind of the 1960s. I heard on CNBC the other day that one of the founders of Home Depot, who is a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, say the biggest issue in this country is income inequality. Now, maybe he's looking at it, maybe he's looking at it from the point of view that his customers can't come in and buy stuff in his stores because of the disparity. But it seems to me that there's a big mood change in the country that will be played out in the coming, not just the state elections, but the presidential election.
Well, I certainly hope so. We've got this huge gap between more people doing better and more people doing worse and not as much in the middle. And people being denied health care. We've got governors in Kentucky and Arkansas expanding Medicaid, and people in Virginia, Republicans in the House of Delegates and most Senate Republicans opposing accepting money that we're already paying for health care for these people.
Nearly $2 billion.
That's right. And that's up to 400,000 Virginians a year who could be covered, uninsured Virginians, including some veterans. 60% of them are working families. And we're denying them health care, which they need, in the name of we don't want federal money, yet we take federal money for so many other things. It's really about reacting to the president instead of having a serious discussion of how we can build our middle class.
Go ahead, Tom.
An issue that doesn't have the emotional volatility of all the things we've discussed is transportation in Northern Virginia.
It doesn't?
Not the not
if
the
you're
same,
sitting in traffic, it might.
it's not the same as the lifeblood of whether you're the same human being as other human beings. But I would say traffic is soul sucking problem in the state. Is that going to be an issue in the fall elections? Or is there something going on there in terms of getting the roadways better?
I think, 3 years ago, the General Assembly approved legislation that generates about. I think it's about
the McDonald plan.
The McDonald plan generates about $300 million a year for Northern Virginia. Problem is, it's not enough. So we've got these public-private partnerships now on the Beltway, on 95, and hot lanes, if you will, and talk about outside the Beltway, 66, and even inside the Beltway, turning them into hot lanes. I think that people want more transportation. They want more transportation dollars. I don't know how. It's always an issue.
You can't build your way out of traffic, though.
No,
Yeah.
I think transit is the way to go. And if that happens on 66, there could be more money generated for transit. I know in Route 1 corridor, which I represent, we want to extend Metro to Hybla Valley, came up with a study to get that started, or the process started. It's a very long process. But we're not seeing the money from Congress. The Federal Highway Trust, as you know, is running out of money. And even the Metro funding from Congress, that $150 million a year match that I carried a bill for in Virginia, the Congress matches with DC, Maryland, and Virginia put in. We don't have an assurance that that's going to continue for the full 10 years.
I want to talk politics again for a while because federal judges are looking into whether lawmakers illegally gerrymandered legislative districts when they drew boundaries most recently in Virginia. What do you see as being at stake in this case, and what do you make of how the boundaries are currently drawn?
Well, they certainly are gerrymandered. The House is worse than the Senate, but I'm not going to claim goodness in both chambers.
All the hands are
That
a bit
said,
dirty there.
the lawsuit is on the House districts because the issue, similar to the 3rd Congressional District, is whether or not districts were packed with more minorities that dilutes significance of the minority vote in adjacent districts. And I think there's a good chance, based on what federal courts have ruled in other cases, Supreme Court in one case, that we could see courts rule that the House of Delegates in Virginia would have to be redrawn. If that happens politically, there's even a chance that in addition to this year's 2015 elections, they could order elections to be held in 2016, the presidential year, which would be great for Democrats, and then go back to another election in 17. So 3 elections, 3 years. But if we win that lawsuit, it'll be wonderful. I voted against redistricting.
If you don't win that lawsuit, do you think it's conceivable that Democrats can reclaim a majority in either chamber or the General Assembly the way the boundaries are drawn now?
Sure, we can reclaim a majority in the Senate this election cycle. Right now, it's 21-19, 21 Republicans. If we got to 2020, the lieutenant governor breaks the tie vote. Democrats control the Senate. But we have opportunities, whether they're in Richmond, Chesterfield, Virginia Beach, and elsewhere, to be 21-19 or better ourselves. So the Senate has a great opportunity. The House is more in a building issue, but there are a number of districts that were won by the president and most of our statewide officials that we've got dynamic candidates running in.
We have time for one more question.
Well, let's do a baby boomer question. Do you think Virginia will ever catch up? You introduced some marijuana laws to decriminalize marijuana. It didn't go anywhere in the state. The district has moved far ahead. Maryland has moved ahead. Virginia's bringing up the rear on this. What do you think?
Well, we're going to move ahead, but it's going to be perhaps slower than we'd like. I've got I'm on a 2-track policy. One, to decriminalize marijuana, so there's just a fine rather than the other onerous
crime.
Yeah, rather than it being a crime and the onerous things that happen. And then I'm also trying to particularly make sure that you don't lose your driver's license for 6 months on a first-time offense. I think that's outrageous.
Is there medical marijuana in Virginia?
No, we don't have well, we did pass a bill for cannabinoid oil to be legal for people who have if you will, a doctor's note that they had intractable seizures.
I was just thinking maybe some of those tobacco fields could be, repurposed.
That would be fine.
Think too much. That's your
That
problem.
would be fine. But on the cannabinoid oil, we don't yet have a law on how to produce it or illegal distribution. But if you possess it and you have intractable epileptic seizures, you can do.
Kojo's about to say goodbye to you.
Ebbin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Did
again.
you watch the flag come down on C-SPAN?
I did not.
It was pretty cool.
Adam Ebbin is a member of the Virginia Senate. He's a Democrat who represents the Commonwealth's 30th District. Once again, thank you for joining us.
Thank
Tom
you.
Sherwood is our resident analyst. He's a reporter for NBC4 and a columnist for the current newspapers. Joining us shortly will be Phil Mendelson, chairman of the DC Council. And even as Phil Mendelson makes his way here, Tom Sherwood, today, members of the council who are on the Health and Human Services Committee are holding a hearing on the so-called Death with Dignity Act. That bill would let adults with less than 6 months to live get the medication that they need that would allow them to end their lives. Several individuals are testifying at the hearing. That includes Susan Ferris, a terminally ill District of Columbia resident, and others. We know, of course, that our own Diane Rehm has weighed in on this issue because of how her husband John passed. And care to comment or
Yes,
analyze
well,
or whatever it is
just
you
before
do?
we came onto the air, I called and asked Mary Chay's staff, since it's her bill, who was testifying and how many. And she said there was over 70 people who are going to testify. I did stories on this week. There's a group, a coalition that's been formed called No DC Suicide, which is
Opposing the bill?
Opposing the bill. Thinking, and one of the issues is that people with disabilities and aged people are subject to being coerced into agreeing to end their lives or to have that decision in fact made for them. Mary Chay responded, "No, this is a very tight thing, law, similar to Oregon's law, which has been in place since the late 1990s. Two physicians within 6 months of death who can then prescribe something for you, but the person who is to die has to do self-administering, has to take the concoction or pills or whatever it is themselves. They cannot be administered by anyone else, a family member or a doctor or whatever." So Mary Chay says there are plenty of cautionary restrictions on this law so that this can truly be used by people who really want to do it. And even after receiving these medicines, they don't have to take them.
Joining us in studio is Phil Mendelson. He is chairman of the DC Council. Council Chairman Mendelson, thank you for joining us. What do you think about the Death with Dignity Act?
Here. I'm supportive of the legislation, and I think that it recognizes that there are people who are struggling, typically in their later years, and that sometimes it's merciful to them and reflecting their own wishes to let them pass away. And it's important that there are controls in place, but as Tom described, there are controls in place. And of course, that's what the hearing process is about, to refine the legislation.
If you have questions or comments for Chairman Mendelson, you know the number, you know the drill. 800-433-8850 allow you to remind you. You can send email to kojo@wamu.org or tweet at Kojo Show, or go to our website, kojoshow.org, and watch the live video stream of this broadcast.
The opponents were telling me that there were concerns that, one, you can doctor shop to get the two doctors. And two, that many people who are diagnosed with maybe 6 months to live actually, in fact, live longer than that, sometimes 2 and 3 years longer because of a misdiagnosis. And that some people who might have lived longer for their children and their family members die because they've been wrongly told that they were terminally ill and would die. So they say that whatever safeguards Mary Chay or the council puts in the bill, it really won't protect enough people from falsely or improperly dying too soon.
I'm not sure that some of those criticisms are on point. Again, this is about an individual and his or her own quality of life, their sense of how they are living, their decision. And I think some of the opposition is about this notion that somehow a third party is going to intervene. Well, that would be illegal anyway. My understanding is that the experience in Oregon has been not large numbers. We're not talking about hundreds of people.
Maybe 100 people a year is what I was told.
I thought it was a little bit less than that. But we're not talking about a large number of people. And we're talking about people who, can we respect that somebody can assess their own quality of life? I mean, this isn't just about the doctor says to me, I have 6 months left to live. This is about my experiencing that I am rapidly losing my my abilities, my skills, and that my quality of life is miserable.
Right.
I was about to move on to another subject, but this subject is what William in Silver Spring, Maryland wants to address. So, William, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Kojo. Thank you for taking my call. I want to comment about the conservative take on the Death with Dignity Act. It interests me that a lot of Death with Dignity Acts, a lot of doctor-assisted suicide, ever since the Dr. Kevorkian incident and all that a while ago, has been painted as very much a liberal democratic takeover, kind of a left-wing kind of issue. But I was interested, I just want to comment that I see the Death with Dignity Act and the entire idea of doctor-assisted suicide to be fundamentally a conservative issue because it repairs the relationship that is broken between the individual and the state. That is, the state tells the individual that they don't have the choice whether they want to live or not, and the Death with Dignity Act gives the individual increased choice. I think what offends some people who oppose the Death with Dignity Act is that they think that all of a sudden that means they have to, they are all of a sudden being given a choice they don't want, or that they are going to be coerced in the Death with Dignity Act into doing something they don't want with their life. But I was interested to hear your panelists comment on the conservative versus liberal kind of basing for support for the Death with
Phil
Dignity Act.
Mendelssohn has made it clear on several occasions that the choice rests with the individual.
Correct, and
themselves.
I think it's an interesting way, the phrasing that the caller made, that there are opponents who feel as though this is taking away a choice, when in fact it's activating a choice. Are libertarians conservative or are they liberal? I don't know.
I think they would reject both labels, but
Yeah.
But,
This does
but
speak
again,
to
this goes
the-
back to my 1960s view that we are repeating much of the 1960s about who we are, what country we are, whether it's income disparity or whether it's a right to die or suicide. I mean, this in the discrimination and the ongoing discussions, it's just a remarkable time.
It is indeed, but Phil and I wouldn't know anything about that. We weren't alive in the 1960s.
That was an invitation to him to comment and not to have the host.
To try to recall
No,
my
You
my
remember
years
the
when I was in the
60s. You were in the
60s.
60s.
Yes, I was young.
The Wilson Building is
I
just...
don't know where society is going, Tom.
I know where this conversation is going. The Wilson Building is just up the street from the old post office pavilion, the place where Donald Trump is set to open a luxury hotel. Yesterday, protesters gathered for a Dump Trump event ignited by comments Trump made about Mexican immigrants when he began his presidential campaign. A year ago, some of the biggest politicians in D.C. posed with Donald Trump at the groundbreaking, including now Mayor Muriel Bowser. What is your level of comfort or discomfort with the project Trump is involved with here in D.C.? Do you think it still has a place in the city?
And you weren't there that day, I don't think. 'Cause
No, I was not there
I looked
a
in the
year ago.
video to see if you were there, and I didn't see you.
So did I.
Thank you.
We're looking for you.
Any other videos you've been checking out? Andy?
Oh, you know.
All the cameras out on the street. Folks love to celebrate economic development, and that would be why there was this big rollout a year ago. And to be sure, Trump has quite a name when it comes to economic development across the country. Donald Trump has chosen to run for president. As such, he has a very public platform now, and he needs to realize that this is a very diverse country, and we celebrate diversity. If one chooses to make disparaging remarks based on ethnicity, they're going to get a huge pushback, and that's what's going on here. He asked for this.
A big part of that pushback is intended to persuade you, the council, the mayor, to pressure your federal partners on this, to push Trump out. The General Services Administration is managing this project. How are you going to respond to that
I'm not
pressure?
sure how productive that would be, and that's not to say that the district shouldn't comment, but in the end, the decision is the federal government's. The decision was made by the federal government, and any reversal in that would be made by the federal government.
And one of the things,
Are you prepared to share with the federal government a sense of the council, if there is such a thing at some point?
Yes, I'm prepared, but I want to take this a step further, because symbolism seems to be very much in the news today. On the way over here, I was wondering what questions you might ask, such as about the football team or about the flag in South Carolina.
It is not for you
There's
to
an
wonder. It's for us
important
to ask.
role. It's a very important role, symbolism. It says something about what we think. But in the end, it's more substantive things are necessary. So we get rid of the Confederate flag in South Carolina at the state capitol. Have we gotten rid of racism in South Carolina? No. I think it's important that we have the debate, the discussion, that we confront racism. But taking down the flag is not what's going to change it. So we can have that same discussion about the name on the big signs in front of the old post office. But does that in itself change what some of the attitudes, the abhorrent attitudes are towards folks who come to this country from other countries. You know, when I grew up, and I'm not saying it's any different today, we celebrated Ellis Island and the fact that we're a diverse country, that we're a melting pot. I think it's very important. And that's really, I think that's what's most important here, is that we confront that kind of discrimination, which has a very long history in this country, the know-nothings in the 19th century.
Some people were telling me, I was at the demonstration, some people were telling me that it's almost that Trump has doubled down or tripled down or quadrupled down on his remarks, and it's very difficult for them to see how he can walk it back to say something to smooth the waters over this. We've had two major restaurateurs who have now withdrawn from the Trump project. That means jobs in the city. That means loss of tax revenue. I don't know what business person now is going to want to go and put a business inside Trump Hotel. I don't know. Would you hold an event there? Probably not, given the cost that would be. But I mean, I can see economic trouble for the city, consequences for the city.
Well, I think that's
so
overstating.
The city council, to the council reach out?
I think that's overstating it. I don't want to be glib about it. The city should be a welcoming environment for business activity, but is at the end of the district, if a developer who makes injudicious, bad comments, prejudicial comments, that's on him. And the way he's handled this, very much the way he's handled this. I think it's the same thing with the football team. You know, the owner there has doubled down, and all that's happened is that the controversy has festered and grown. You know, I mean, that's on him.
The team cannot return to the city, whatever the conditions are for it to build its own stadium, unless the name were to change.
I've not said that.
What did you say?
know, I think you're getting into other issues. Should the city subsidize a football stadium, having gone through a huge controversy over the baseball?
Oh, no.
Stadium?
I think it's pretty clear that even Jack Evans, who supports the various teams, has said the team would have to build its facility, just like the soccer team is doing.
Okay, well, so let's just say it's a matter of right development. Doesn't involve the city at all. I mean, that's his choice. But there's going to be controversy everywhere Dan Snyder goes, because he, instead of putting this issue behind him and being sensitive and recognizing what's going on, that he's on the wrong side of history on this, that instead he wants to fight, and that's.
Let's talk taxes. You pushed through with a plan to
Yes.
accelerate tax
I wanna
cuts for
talk
DC
taxes.
income earners, cuts that were approved by the council last year. It ultimately came down to a compromise among council members to enact the cuts in September as opposed to next year. Why do you feel accelerating them was the right thing to do?
Well, let me start with a little background. We appointed.
We only got 10 minutes
Thank you,
left.
Councilor Wood. Thank you. I love you too. We had created a tax revision commission a couple of years ago, chaired by Tony Williams, a diverse membership on that commission. The commission came up with recommendations for how we could restructure income tax, business taxes, and a few other taxes. They prioritized what taxes we should address. The council last year, not this year, last year, adopted that package of cuts. A few increases. There were some suggestions that we did not do, such as increasing the sales tax rate or taxing home improvement contractors in the district as a sales tax. But for the most part, we adopted their recommendations last year. The chief financial officer said, hey, wait a minute, slow down. You can't be just reducing revenues, so you've got to tie this to revenue growth. So we said, okay. I don't think we gave a lot of attention to that a year ago. We tied it to February revenue estimates. Well, we have the opportunity, because revenues are growing right now, are growing fantastically, to accelerate those triggers. That's what the debate was about. The debate was not about whether we should cut income taxes, but whether we should cut income taxes for residents when they file next year, that is effective this year, or we wait a year and put it off. And there's been some misinformation about what those tax cuts were. There was not criticism a year ago, other than our expanding the sales tax base to health clubs. But this year, in accelerating the triggers, people said, well, this is just tax cuts for the wealthy. Far from it. In fact, of all the different categories of income, the people who are earning over $500,000 will see an increase. There's no tax cut here for
Well, even
millionaires.
those who didn't criticize it for being a tax cut for the wealthy, including several members of your council, said you slipped the new schedule into the law without allowing for adequate public debate.
Yeah, I don't
That
agree
it was
with
a
that
power
either.
play on your part.
Yeah, I know, and I don't agree with that either. For one thing, we debated the tax revision commission. Let me back up. The tax revision commission had hearings. The tax revision commission made their recommendation. We had a hearing on that. We put it in the budget with a lot of debate a year ago. In fact, the mayor vetoed the budget, so we debated it some more. The Budget Support Act, where we accelerated the triggers, was approved, was voted first vote on May 27th and the second vote on June 30th. There was a whole month in there for people to debate the triggers.
This second or third wave of tax cuts, a lot of the cuts initially were for the middle class and lower income.
Yes.
And this one has a little more mix and some higher income. And that's what
Yes.
people object to. I think Lisa Silverman said, well, do we really need to follow through on this? Because, and you told her, look, this has been decided. What difference does it make whether the tax changes go into effect in June or September, because it will still cover the year? Well, it seemed to me that was kind of just a compromise to get it off the table with the mayor and the people who didn't like it. Because if you go enact a tax cut in September, it's for the whole year of 2015, not just prorated for the last 3 months. So the September thing seemed to me to be an artifice.
The point I was making was that the revenues are growing now. They're growing between the current fiscal year and the next fiscal year.
The city has plenty of money.
Yes. And they're growing by over $200 million. And then the CFO came out with a revenue estimate 2 weeks ago that, in fact, the revenues are $100 million more than that growth. So, yes, the city has plenty of money. The argument I made was that we have the ability for individuals to save on their income taxes now. We should do it now. And with the September compromise, they will be able to do it now.
Now, let me quickly, I was talking with Sam Jewell, who's an activist in the housing world, who was concerned about the tax cuts going into effect, as some are, and he says, can this city commit to spending the money for better housing that it needs to do? And the mayor has $100 million every year in the Housing Trust Fund. Can the city aggressively continue to go after housing issues, the number one issue in town, with these tax cuts?
I think so. We put $100 million into the Housing Production Trust Fund this year. And in fact, you know, the Mayor Bowser, when she sent down the budget, proposed an increase in the sales tax and said that was the only way we'd be able to fund increased resources for homelessness and affordable housing. We were able to not only adopt her proposal for homelessness and affordable housing, but increase the dollars for both and to not do the sales tax. Yes, we have the ability to do this. I think the subtext for some individuals is that they want to repeal some of these tax cuts. In fact, what we did was we took the Tax Revision Commission's recommendations. The wealthiest people will see an increase. We incrementalized these so that we could do it based on increasing revenues. And we mixed up who's getting the benefits. So yes, there are some like the estate tax.
Speaking of which, that's
people.
what Jerry in Washington, D.C. wants to ask about, is the estate tax. So Jerry, your turn.
Yes, hi, Kojo. Hi, Chairman Mendelson and Tom. I'm Chairman Mendelson is perhaps familiar with me. I emailed him. He responded. And then about the estate tax.
Okay, but we only have a minute left. What's your issue?
You said that it was the Virginia doesn't have an estate tax and Maryland's raising it to the federal level. But the point is they're not unequal like D.C. They don't have angry black men murdering people, white people for nothing. What are we going to do about the social, racial, class divide? We don't have time. We don't have any time. We should have done it last year. We have to address it now.
Jerry, if you call to ask about the real estate tax, I find it very objectionable that you would put in there an inflammatory statement about black men running around killing white people.
It has to do with the estate tax.
Please respond, Chairman Mendelson.
Well, we did a mix of.
We don't have much. What is the estate tax going to be?
What we're doing, the next increment would be that the estate tax will the threshold goes from $1 million to $2 million.
And the federal is like $5 million.
The federal's at $5 million. At the end of the list it goes up to $5 million.
Are we going to have a streetcar? What is your latest word from the administration? I'll talk to Dorm Show, the director of transportation, could not give me any clear idea that this thing is going to go forward. Are we going to have those?
Have we bungled that, or have we bungled
Maybe turn them into food trucks.
No.
I have a food question.
I would like to see the streetcar operating on H Street. I think it will tell us a lot about whether we should be expanding the streetcar any further or just cut it at
Get
this.
some people, yeah.
I think it actually will create a unique character about H Street. I'd like to see it.
And where do you want to build a new jail?
Well, you're throwing some stuff out.
And we don't have much time to answer.
Correct. I think we
And
have
you
the
still have
ability.
a minute.
I think we have the ability,
half.
when we have the money, to build a new jail at the site of the current jail.
Some council members are moving to disapprove the renewal of the contract for Chartwells, which provides food services for the public schools, but there are
Yes.
concerns about whether disruption to the food service at schools would result from any changes before this school year, despite Chartwell's track record. What do you see as the smartest way forward here?
Well, my understanding of compromise has been worked out, and that what the executive has agreed to do, when I
The
should
mayor.
say the mayor, is to renew the contract for 1 year, put it back out on the street, and I believe there'll be some other changes in the short term with regard to monitoring and accountability.
Are you worried about increasing violence on the metro? The man who was stabbed to death 30 times, people didn't pay attention. I'm worried that
And by the way, there was no indication that that incident was racially based.
no,
I don't know
no,
why.
I don't want to suggest that,
Unlike
but I'm
South
suggesting
Carolina.
that we're losing the ridership, and the Governor McAuliffe and others have said the Metro Board needs to move hell of a lot faster to find someone to run the thing.
Well, this is a difficult question because on the one hand, I'm worried, and on the other hand, I will ride the rails. Metro is safe, but the perception of safety is critical to its viability. That murder that took place is horrific. I mean, just awful. And Metro's got to get ahead of this. People have got to feel safe on Metro. I have a smart card in my wallet, 2 of them, as a matter of fact, and I will not hesitate to ride
Phil
Metro.
Mendelson is chairman of the DC Council. He is a Democrat. Remember, July 21st, we will be in Virginia at the Senetic Theater with our guest Senator Tim Kaine. You can join us there. Go to our website, kojoshow.org, for tickets. Tom Sherwood is our resident analyst. He's a reporter for NBC4 and a columnist for the current newspapers. Have a good weekend.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all for listening. I'm Kojo Nnamdi. Coming up Monday on the Kojo Nnamdi Show, water bills are set to